Alright, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about roles and the powers of the president. Let's do it. Alright, we are up to our second branch, and so it is quite appropriate that Article 2 of the Constitution tells us all about the powers of the president. Her exclusive powers, meaning those that can be exercised without Congress or anybody else, are actually quite limited. The president is commander-in-chief, can receive ambassadors, grant pardons, call a special session of Congress, and deliver the State of the Union. That's really all they can do by themselves. Now, the commander-in-chief power as head of the armed forces is quite significant, and we'll talk more about that later. But notice how little the president is able to do on his or her own in domestic policy according to the Constitution. It's true that presidents today seem like they have a lot more power than that, so how can that be? What changed? Well, those are good questions and we'll get to them very shortly. But before we get to those informal powers, let's start with the president's formal powers. Formal powers are powers given by the Constitution or a law, so they include the exclusive powers already mentioned, like being commander-in-chief, but also include the veto power. A veto is a message to Congress where the president is able to reject legislation that Congress has passed. This is a significant power. In fact, sometimes just the threat of a veto by the president is enough to get Congress to make changes to the bill in an attempt to avoid having the bill vetoed. It's important to point out, though, that Congress is able to check this check by overriding the veto with a 2/3 vote in both houses. However, only about 4% of vetoes have been overridden. So this is a really strong check the president has. There's another kind of veto, and that's the pocket veto. Now, unlike the regular veto, in this case, the president takes no action. He does nothing, and the bill doesn't become a law. Well, how can that be? So, when the president receives a bill from Congress that is passed, she has 10 days to sign it or veto it. Normally, if the president does nothing, that bill will become a law without presidential approval. However, if the session of Congress ends within the 10 days after the president receives the bill, the president can take no action, and this time the bill does not become a law. That's a pocket veto. Another formal power of the president is the power to make treaties subject to Senate ratification, as well as to nominate certain federal officials, such as judges. But we're going to talk about this in more detail in a couple of minutes in slightly different context. For now, though, we're going to focus on informal powers. Now, these powers aren't listed in the Constitution or given in any law, but they're still really important. In fact, presidents rely very heavily on these because remember, they lack significant formal powers from the Constitution. Okay, so one of the biggest is executive orders, and there's a lot to unpack here. So first, what are executive orders? Executive orders are rules or regulations that have the power of law and don't require congressional approval. Okay, so let's stop right there because that sounds like a lot of power for one person to just act unilaterally. What's going on here? Remember, the president is the head of the executive branch, and so he or she can issue executive orders to tell the executive branch's bureaucracy how to interpret or enforce laws. He or she can make rules that the executive branch has to follow. And some of you might be thinking right now, well, if executive orders have the power of law and they don't require congressional approval, then why doesn't the president just make executive orders to make general policy? Wouldn't that make his life so much easier? And yes, it absolutely would. So why did Obama spend a year fighting with Congress over the drafting of the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare? And for that matter, why didn't Trump just issue an executive order repealing Obamacare? Why did both of them rely on Congress to get the job done for them? Remember, presidents don't actually have the power to make laws. Only Congress does. Executive orders must be constitutional or they'll be struck down by the judiciary. This formal limit constrains the president and prevents him from attempting to rule by edict, acting unilaterally to make policies on his or her own. The accepted use of executive orders is directing the bureaucracy and conducting foreign policy, not making general policy for the whole nation. And there's also an informal check on this power, and that is that over-reliance on executive orders is generally criticized as a president attempting to circumvent separation of powers and as the president taking too much power for himself. And there's also the fact that the next president can get rid of the previous president's executive orders very quickly and easily by himself. All he has to do is, well, issue new executive orders. So these don't necessarily have the staying power that legislation passed by Congress has. Another informal power is the ability to issue signing statements, which are written statements by a president when signing a bill and provides her interpretation of the bill. It might include instructions to the bureaucracy about how the president wants the bill enforced, or it might state the president's opinion that a certain section of the law is actually unconstitutional or foolish, and he might even say that the president won't enforce that part of the law. Additionally, presidents have to rely very strongly on their powers of bargaining and persuasion. Because the Senate has confirmation powers and Congress has the power of the purse and the power to, well, actually make legislation, the president will almost assuredly need to bargain, negotiate, and compromise with Congress to get things done. Similarly, presidents are very reliant on their powers of persuasion because they lack extensive constitutional powers. So, to get things done, especially in domestic policy, they need Congress. And presidents that are more popular are far more successful in winning congressional support. So, presidents need both public support and congressional support to actually carry out and implement their agenda. And one last informal power is the ability to make executive agreements. These are basically just like a treaty, but the nice thing for presidents is that they don't require Senate ratification. So the president can make the agreement with foreign heads of state, and boom, the deal is made, nothing else to do. Now, I already alluded to it, but there are decisions that will naturally lead to tension and confrontations between Congress and the president. For example, the president has the power to nominate various officials, such as federal judges, cabinet secretaries, ambassadors, and heads of executive agencies, and all of these are subject to Senate confirmation. This raises the need for bargaining and negotiation, as previously discussed. Judicial appointments specifically are often the most contentious issue of a president's term, because these are lifetime appointments and therefore represent a president's longest lasting influence. Then there are some jobs that the president can appoint people to himself without the Senate getting involved, such as the White House staff, his chief of staff, press secretary, advisors. Mostly it's the people who work in the White House with the president, and he can freely choose his own staff. A major advantage that presidents have over Congress is their ability to communicate directly with the public. Teddy Roosevelt once said that the presidency is a bully pulpit, meaning that this position of authority allows the president to speak out on any issue and for what he says to be notable and newsworthy, so he can draw attention to issues just by talking about them. Similarly, the State of the Union address is delivered annually by the president to Congress. It's a nationally televised speech in which the president has the eyes and attention of the whole country and attempts to gain support for his agenda and to put pressure on Congress to work with him and his policy goals. And in the last decade or so, the rise of social media and new technologies have made it very easy for presidents to communicate quickly and directly with the public. The president doesn't need to rely on traditional media outlets anymore and instead can go right to the people and make his opinions known. Now, I should also mention that there is a debate between an expansive interpretation and a limited interpretation of presidential powers, with some arguing that presidents should have more power to make policy and act unilaterally, while others believe that their power should be more constrained to the constitutional limits placed upon it. And probably nowhere is that debate more prominent than in the area of foreign policy. There is a natural constitutional tension over foreign policy, because the president is commander-in-chief, but only Congress has the power to declare war. So you see how the framers separated those powers. That said, presidents today have significant advantages when it comes to making foreign policy. So typically, Congress largely defers to the president in foreign policy issues. In addition to his role as commander-in-chief, the president nominates ambassadors, negotiates treaties and executive agreements, makes executive orders, and receives daily briefings from defense, diplomatic, and intelligence services. Now, Congress is not without foreign policy powers of their own, the most significant today being the power of the purse, because, let's face it, it's tough to fight a war without funding. The longer a conflict drags on, the more important congressional oversight can become as well. And let's finish up this video with our required document, Federalist number 70, in which Hamilton argues in favor of a unitary executive. Hamilton says that having a single person as president will allow the president to act more quickly in moments of crisis, and that public opinion will be a more effective check on a single president than it would be on a plural executive. Okay, deep breath. I know that was a lot, so awesome job sticking with me all the way to the end. I know you see the multiple choice questions popping up. Make sure that you pause the video and answer the questions so you can test yourself and make sure that you're comfortable with all things presidential. Go ahead and put your answers in the comments below, and then check out the description for the answer key. Next up is the bureaucracy. Until next time, this has been a Money production. Alright, thanks again for watching this video. Do me a favor, hit that like button for me if this video helped you at all. Subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you ring that bell so you get notifications for new content that'll be coming out all the time as we prepare for this AP Gov exam. And check out the AP Gov Ultimate Review Packet. The link is in the description below. I'm sure that it's going to help you on that AP exam, so be sure to check that out. I'll see you guys soon.